Are Israel and Hezbollah on the verge of full-blown war? The two sides are stepping up rhetoric and cross-border attacks. Israel says plans for an offensive in Lebanon have been approved. But what would a war look like this time around? And does diplomacy stand a chance? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Neave Barker. Tensions between the Israeli military and Lebanese armed group Hezbollah are at an all-time high. They've been engaged in low-level hostilities for more than 8 months. The assassination of one of Hezbollah's most senior commanders last week, however, saw an unprecedented response. US President Joe Biden sent a special envoy to the region, hoping to diffuse tensions and prevent a wider conflict. But has it worked? And with no sign the Israeli military is close to ending its war on Gaza in the south, is it now on the brink of opening up a second front in the north? We'll try to answer those questions shortly with our panel of guests. But first, this report by Michael Apple.
For more than 8 months, Hezbollah and the Israeli army have exchanged fire across the Lebanon border. In some cases, Israel has launched actual fire. The Iran-backed armed group says it's conducted more than 2,000 military operations in support of Hamas since October. Tens of thousands of people on both sides of the border have been forced to leave their homes.
Hezbollah's increasing aggression is bringing us to the brink of what could be a wider escalation.
Hezbollah ramped up attacks last week after an Israeli strike killed one of its senior commanders, firing its largest volley yet of missiles and attack drones into northern Israel. Hoping to avoid a wider conflict, US President Joe Biden dispatched Special Envoy Amos Hochstein to meet leaders in Lebanon and Israel.
The situation is serious. We have seen an escalation over the last few weeks. And what President Biden wants to do is to avoid a further escalation to a greater war.
But as Hochstein wrapped up meetings in Beirut, Hezbollah released drone footage it says shows sensitive military sites deep within Israel. Analysts say the group's message is clear.
Hezbollah's capabilities continue to expand, become more sophisticated, and are more able to penetrate through the Israeli defensive systems.
Israel's response late on Wednesday was an announcement that senior generals had approved operational plans for a ground offensive in Lebanon. Inflammatory rhetoric is also fueling tensions.
For victory, we need to enter the north and fight Hezbollah and annihilate them.
The rivals have gone beyond this point before, fighting a month-long war in 2006. And now, both sides appear to be willing to violate the unwritten rules of engagement that govern their low-level hostilities. But that will come at a cost. The region's a tinderbox. One wrong move by either side could set it all off. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
OK, let's bring in our guests. From Beirut, we're joined by Nicholas Noe, the editor-in-chief of MiddleEastWire.com, which provides English translations of significant news stories and opinion pieces for media in 22 Arab countries and the Arab diaspora. In Durham in the UK is Robert Geist Pinfold, a lecturer in peace and security at Durham University and a senior fellow at the Herzl Centre for Israel Studies. And also in Beirut is Mohanad Hage, Deputy Research Director at the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Centre. He also authored the 2017 book, Nationalism, Transnationalism and Political Islam, Hezbollah's Institutional Identity. A very warm welcome to all three of you. Thanks for joining us on Inside Story. Robert, I wonder if I can start with you. An Israeli naval base, an Iron Dome factory are among the many highly sensitive sites in northern Israel, picked up by this apparent Hezbollah spy drone. The findings of that drone made very much public by Hezbollah. What message do you think the group was trying to send here?
Well, this is all about deterrence. Both sides have kept their bigger weapons in the sheds for the time being. Neither Israel nor Hezbollah is looking for an escalation here that would lead to an all-out war between both parties. Yes, there's been daily exchanges, but remember that Hezbollah has anywhere around 150,000 rockets. That's over 10 times more than the number of rockets that were in the Gaza Strip. So this could really degenerate into a regional conflagration. Israel itself, you've had Defense Minister Yoav Gallant say that any confrontation, any war would turn Lebanon back to the Stone Age, basically emphasizing that the country would not be able to recover. It would be a fatal blow to not just to Hezbollah, but also to Lebanon. But this is both sides basically saber rattling in order to stop the other from escalating. Neither Israel nor Hezbollah wants this to become a war, but we're at this trigger point at the moment where all it takes is one miscalculation, all it takes is one attack that causes more deaths than intended or misses the target, and then we very well may find ourselves at that point where tensions escalate so much that war becomes almost unavoidable.
So, Mohanad, saber rattling, says Robert, but with extremely high stakes here. One foot wrong could mean that the entire region potentially tumbles into war. Israel has announced that a potential attack on Lebanon has been, quote, approved. Does that mean a full-scale conflict is now imminent?
Yes, I mean, we've been hearing lots of these statements in the past months. Israel threatening to annihilate the Lebanese infrastructure, or what's left of it, given the country's years of crisis since 2019. We've seen the defense minister saying, for instance, look at the images of Gaza Strip, aerial images of Gaza Strip, and compare them to Beirut now. This is what Beirut will look like. So these threats have been ongoing for quite a while now. But what the US envoy has been saying recently is that the margin of error of things going wrong has widened, and it's more likely now that something wrong might happen outside the calculations of these two actors, which would lead to a wider confrontation. And this is why we are saying Hezbollah send a message, a deterrence message to Israel, given the political changes and the lack of ability to speculate what the Israeli next move is, given now that it's a more right-wing government and Netanyahu is battling different forces and different visions within his own government, including his own personal calculations.
So, Nicholas, how much do we actually know about Hezbollah's military capabilities? Is it something of a mystery?
I think what we know publicly is that they have really shifted the military balance of power over the last 24 years since they ejected the Israelis after 22 years of occupation in South Lebanon. They have steadily built up capabilities such that we had a really incredible event that you spoke about at the top of the show, which is the drone footage, apparently uninterdicted, going over some of the most sensitive military sites, including the air defense sites of Israel. Really incredible. But let's remember, this is a group that in 1997 was already hacking into Israeli drones and watching the footage, and then were able to kill a dozen or more of the best Israeli commandos in a raid in 97. They were hacking into drones before the Iraqi groups were doing so. They were flying drones over undetected the Israeli Dimona nuclear facilities many years ago. In 2006 war, Israel and Lebanon, or Israel and Hezbollah, let's say, fought to a standstill with devastation, especially on the Lebanese side, but they already had prevented an Israeli incursion such that the Israeli army was unable to move more than a few kilometers across the border. That was 2006. That was 18 years ago. This group has fought significantly in Hezbollah, in Syria, in that conflict. It's fought now in other areas, is training Houthis, is training Iraqi groups, etc. So the capabilities, it's fairly certain, are tremendous. I would just say one thing else to your guest point, who spoke about the capabilities are still in the shed. I think that that's probably likely true for Hezbollah. However, I think the Israelis really have tried, and they've revealed some of their intelligence capabilities in their fairly significant attacks and assassinations of important Hezbollah figures. I would wager, given the past history of this conflict, that Hezbollah probably has a lot more in the shed to bring out if this does actually expand as compared to Israel. And I think actually the Israeli problem right now is that in their own capabilities, even air defense, they are clearly lacking. And that begs the question whether or not their allies like the US will be absolutely vital if this war expands in the coming period.
Nicholas, following on from what we've just heard, of course, what does it then potentially mean for Israel to be fighting on two fronts? So Hezbollah in the north, Hamas, Islamic Jihad in the south.
Well, it's not just two fronts. The whole resistance axis and unity of fronts is that Israel is going to actually face even more than what it currently is facing, which is several fronts. They have a front essentially involved with the Houthis and the Red Sea, and attempts, we think, by the Houthis to actually directly attack Israel. That's true also of Iraqi groups, Iraqi militias. That may be less true, but still somewhat true within Syria. And of course, Iran also engaged in a reprisal that was, one of the largest such attacks in modern history, and that was only repelled successfully, some of us believe, because of the tremendous involvement of the United States and allied Arab nations with the U.S., as well as the clear projecting that the Iranians did that such an attack was coming. So Israel faces problems in Gaza with a very, let's say, a less capable fighting force in Hamas, which has no strategic depth. It's facing a much harder enemy with Hezbollah, with strategic depth, and with a resistance axis that evidently is involved in this fight currently. And one thinks, and I'd be interested to hear what the other guests think on this, one thinks that those actors will probably become even more involved if this war really expands. That's at least my assumption.
Well, putting that to Robert, would these actors be more heavily involved?
Well, it's impossible to tell, really, and we like to create this nice binary between kind of war and the current status quo, but I suspect we might see just continuous spirals of escalation. Those actors are likely to get involved, yes, if we see an all-out war. But I remember on October the 7th, there was a genuine fear in Israel that, this was basically the start of Israel's war with Iran, open war with Iran at least, and that didn't transpire. You didn't see for example, Hezbollah actually declare all-out war and go to war with Israel. So there is still a chance to wheel this back. At the end of the day, Israel's key, the last thing they can use to basically try and prevent an escalation is the fact that they do have the kinetic power to damage Lebanon significantly, and indeed to send it back to the Stone Age, as Defense Minister Yoav Gallant argued. And the strategy there would be not just to target Hezbollah, but to target the Lebanese state. Now, that's for several reasons. One, because Israel doesn't want a long war. It doesn't have the troops. It doesn't have the resources for a long war. It would also harm Israel's economy. The second is that Hezbollah are very, very hard to get to. It's much easier to target the Lebanese state. And the third is that if Israel feels that if it targets the Lebanese state and does enough damage, that will cause an international intervention that will get both sides to arrive at a ceasefire. That's Israel's war aims, and that's kind of the last trump card they have to try and prevent an escalation. I'm not legitimizing it, I'm not justifying it, but that is Israel's strategy for deterring Hezbollah. The question is whether that's going to be tested.
Talking about international intervention with the hopes of a ceasefire, enter, of course, US envoy Amos Hochstein, notably an Israeli-American businessman who visited the region looking for a diplomatic way of diffusing current tensions. There are also efforts, of course, as you all know, made by France as well. Hezbollah has repeatedly said it will not negotiate a truce before a ceasefire is implemented in Gaza. Mohanad, how much of a tight spot do you think that puts the United States and, of course, Israel?
Yeah, this is exactly the way Hezbollah designed its intervention. It's as Nasrallah said in Nasrallah's own words, it's a solidarity and support war engagement from Hezbollah's side. So for them, as Israel attacks Rafah and as there are more operations there, this means they need to escalate. And, for them, this will help us. This will help the Hamas and the whole effort to end the war, according to Hamas's terms, or support Hamas's terms in the negotiations to end the effort. For Hamas, this has to be an end. Any exchange of its prisoners with Palestinians in Israeli jails has to see the conflict end. And this is now where it's stalling in the Gaza Strip. And I think Hezbollah's pressure on the southern borders is basically designed to help Hamas negotiate a better end for the conflict, and to keep Hamas from being annihilated, or to help it survive in the next phase. Given that we're reaching this very last strip of Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip. So yes, it's sincere for Hezbollah an end for the conflict in the Gaza Strip according to Israel's plans, which is invading Rafah, continuing the war indefinitely in the next weeks and months, is not conducive for the organization. They understand if Israel finishes its operations in the Gaza Strip, it will turn around and attack Hezbollah. And so this is really the right timing for an escalation according to Hezbollah's vision, or how they see the conflict moving forward. And you've mentioned that in your question to Nick, in the sense that Israel fighting on two fronts will not be helpful, will not be a vantage point for Israel and its exhausted army after many months of fighting. And I disagree with your guest in terms of Israel launching this war, destroying what's left of the Lebanese state, given that the Lebanese state has been losing much of its resources in the past years. But I think Hezbollah will enter a very long conflict with the Israelis, and it has the capabilities, and it has the support, and it has the backing, and it has Syria all along Lebanon's borders to continue, all of that logistical support and backing.
Okay, Mohanad, at this juncture in the conversation, let's provide some context, shall we? I wonder if you can give us a brief understanding of Hezbollah, because they are not just a military group, they are social and political as well.
Yeah, the organization is huge. Since it's started in the 1980s, it has grown tremendously. Now it has parliamentary representation since the 1990s. It started joining the Lebanese government since 2005. It's present in unions. It's the largest Lebanese political party, but at the same time, it's a militant organization. Having its history rooted in fighting against Israeli occupation. But then, given the contention within Lebanon after the Syrian withdrawal in 2005, the party is at the heart of polarization inside the country between those who want to build a Lebanese state which is capable of taking decisions like peace and war, and those who support Hezbollah and believe the organization's anti-imperialism resistance should be at the heart of the Lebanese state. So it's an organization which is a very polarizing subject in Lebanese politics, but it's, as you said, it has many facets. It's political, it's social, and it's also militant with regional links. Right,
I realise that's a very difficult question to answer briefly. But Robert, turning to you, remind us briefly of the 1982 war when Israel invaded southern Lebanon. Obviously, very important context for understanding what's going on.
Well, it didn't just invade southern Lebanon, it basically stretched all the way up in an occupation. What happened in June 1982, is Israel basically intervened in the long and ongoing Lebanese civil war. The ostensible reason for that was that Israel was facing attacks from Palestinian militant groups on its border who were using southern Lebanon as a launching pad for operations. In actual fact, what Israel wanted to do was to cause regime change within Lebanon, to replace the government with a Christian government, Christian-led government that would then arrive at a peace treaty with Israel, and Israel would basically go in, throw its weight around, and leave very quickly. as is the case with many military operations in Israel and military occupations, that didn't work. Israel found itself bogged down, stuck in Lebanon, trying to support its allies, but at the same time feeling that those allies were too weak. If Israel withdrew, that they basically wouldn't be able to last on their own. And this actually led to the creation of Hezbollah. Yes, Israel got rid of those Palestinian groups, but in the words of Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's occupation let the Shiite genie out of the bottle. It created significant resentment and resistance to the Israeli occupation, and this basically gave Hezbollah the oxygen of legitimacy that needed to survive, and survive it did, and survive and thrive. In fact, as was mentioned previously, Israel left Lebanon finally 18 years later in February 2000, but Hezbollah only went from strength to strength. So it was that military occupation that made Hezbollah the political and military entity that it is today.
All right, Nicholas, tell us about Hassan Nasrallah. Why is he as powerful as he is, the leader of Hezbollah, obviously?
Well, I mean, on these questions, I like to defer oftentimes to Mohanad and other Lebanese. I can offer my outsider perspective from the American point of view and American policymakers. I think they view this is someone who has been the head of this party for close to 30 plus years, 32 years. He has evidently deftly managed the growth and expansion of this Lebanese party with an important linkage, some say proxy relationship, to the Islamic Republic of Iran in an incredibly difficult political and economic environment here in Lebanon, as well as having Syria and the Assad dynasty on one side and Israel down on the southern border. Hezbollah has, I think by all accounts, thrived and grown into what it is today, which is probably one of the most powerful non-state armed actors that we've seen in decades, perhaps more. That is an incredible feat when you consider the array of threats. For me, that is a signal failure of great power politics, of diplomacy, of regional de-escalation that we are at this point.
Mohanad, coming back to you, Nicholas there mentioned, of course, the influence of Iran. How much is Iran directly involved, do you think, in calling the shots when it comes to this potential conflict?
Definitely a strategic player. I mean, it's the leading funder of most of these organizations, and it's it's basically a network which believes in the role of the supreme leader as the absolute head of that network. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's kind of a hierarchical relationship in which orders are passed down the line. It's negotiated. It's different opinions arise. Nasrallah himself, given his role and his relationship with the supreme leader in Iran, has a say in that front. I think one of the books which was quite interesting in that regard was that of Hamadani, an IRGC leader who died in Syria, and he wrote in his memoirs that Nasrallah played the leading role in basically convincing the Iranian leadership of joining the war in Syria. So it's I think there's a two-way relationship, and at the same time, just to add a piece of info here, which is that Hezbollah does a lobbying effort within Iran. It has an office in Tehran, and whenever there's a new president, a new government, they always make the effort to sell the cause to whoever comes to office. So it does learn from the Israelis quite a bit when it comes to managing their relationship with the United States as well.
All right, all of that incredibly valuable context. Let's circle this conversation back to what we're talking about, is the threat of potential full-blown war between Hezbollah and Israel. Robert, what does victory potentially look like for Israel? Would it be prepared, for instance, to implement its Dahiyah doctrine to destroy civilian infrastructure in Lebanon and pressure Hezbollah? Do they push as far as Beirut as they did in 1982? What are the likely scenarios for Israel?
Well, the Dahiyah doctrine is exactly what is on the table here. As I said before, Israel's claim that it can and will go after not just Hezbollah, but actually the Lebanese state and the Lebanese state's infrastructure. Now, I've delineated and discussed the reasons for that. But Israel definitely has the capabilities to do so. Yes, Hezbollah is one of the most powerful non-state actors in history. Nevertheless, it's still an asymmetrical conflict. Israel is much more powerful than Hezbollah and significantly much more powerful than the Lebanese state in terms of its destructive potential, in terms of the weapons that it has at its disposal. So what I think we're more likely to see is less of a grand invasion, simply because Israel doesn't have the numbers anymore. Israel's army has been getting smaller and smaller for the last 15 years, particularly with the ongoing Gaza war, particularly with turmoil in the West Bank. Israel's army is stretched thin as it is, which is why I think we're more likely to see Israel rely on that Dahiyya doctrine, basically unleashing airstrikes, unleashing artillery power, trying to destroy and damage the Lebanese state quick enough so that Israel, the international community, will force a ceasefire and avoid that long.
Robert, very, very quickly throwing to Nicholas, because you're shaking your head on this. I know that there have been rules to the standoff on the border in the past. I mean, what do those military rules, very briefly, look like, and how do we get back to something that resembles a kind of cooler standoff?
Oof, you want solutions. That's the toughest one. The rules of the game have looked like what has basically happened till now, which is both sides carefully calibrating an escalation over time. It's just that since the 2006 war, that's always been contained within the rules of the game. The essential problem now is that it's harder and harder to see a way out. Hezbollah has made it clear that they will not cease fire until there's a durable ceasefire in Gaza. That seems very unlikely. The problem there is additional, because even if there is a durable ceasefire in Gaza, which is a tall order, things have gone so far with the Israelis in this conflict, it becomes hard to see how the Israelis can accept the pre-October 7th status quo and the pre-October 7 rules of the game. That is the essential problem. The third problem is that, to your guest's point, I think we need to be very clear that the idea of Israeli military victory using its Dahiyya or Gaza doctrine or whatever is dangerous fantasy. It's not only illegal under international humanitarian law, but it's also dangerous fantasy. Smashing up Lebanon is not going to destroy Hezbollah. Quite to the contrary, it's probably going to strengthen the group as a lot of their natural enemies or opponents actually flee this country, and as the infrastructure is even more devastated.
Nicholas, many thanks for that. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of the programme. Some incredibly challenging ground that we've covered, some very complicated questions. I appreciate all of your efforts in answering them and helping us understand exactly what the future may hold. Robert, Geist, Pinfold, Mohanad, Hage, Ali, Nicholas, many thanks to all three of you for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Neave and the whole team here, it's bye for now.